Hi, thanks for coming to my book club. The name is Davis Baum. Let's do it. For our first meeting, I want to talk about identity in The Alchemist. I read this book as a kid, and I was very surprised when I was rereading it how many people have read this book before. It is a classic, it's awesome, and it's a very light read. Highly recommend. So, for a one-sentence synopsis, our protagonist, Santiago, learns to read and understand the language and soul of the world while he pursues securing the bag. The Alchemist is full of mystical themes. Mystical in a fantastical sense, but also a spiritual one. One of the major themes in this text is identity and how identity interacts with your environment and your own journey. Almost all of the characters in the text are referred to in a very vague way that at first comes off as lazy writing. However, it is not just lazy writing. The seemingly vague references Coelho has for his characters ultimately becomes an indicator for those characters' identity itself. To Coelho, the self is a balancing act between two identities, an abstract self and a practical self. Where you fall in this balancing act kind of determines where your identity is. On one end, I am a 21-year-old stoner experiencing delusions of grandeur in my parents' garage, and on the other, I am Christ. These two selves together make Davis. Santiago is only referred to as Santiago once in the beginning of the story. For the rest of the novel, he is referred to as the shepherd or the boy. The boy represents an abstract self, using more archetypal language. The boy represents a more abstract self, using archetypal language, while the shepherd represents his role in life in a practical sense. Santiago is both the boy and the shepherd at the beginning, but when he sells his flock and decides to give himself up to his own personal legend, he isn't referred to as the shepherd any longer. He is just the boy. The moment he sells his flock and removes the title of the shepherd is also the moment when Santiago takes a major leap towards pursuing his personal legend. Coelho shows very early on in the text that he believes that wherever you are on the spectrum of practicality to abstract conceptual ideas has a lot to say about how you view your purpose in life. Are we here to exist practically or abstractly? I would say both, because both provide value, but we'll get to that later. As Santiago pursues his personal legend, he meets a plethora of people, some called the baker, the Englishman, or the alchemist, and many others. Characters like the baker or the Englishman are referred to by their physical appearance or their roles in a practical sense, while characters such as the alchemist are referred to using archetypal language, like the alchemist. The characters who are referred to by their practical self tend to also be these characters that focus solely on the practical experience as the end-all be-all and miss out on what Coelho describes as their personal legend. And, on the flip side, those characters who are described abstractly or conceptually tend to be living out their personal legend to the fullest, but don't have a major foothold in the practical experience. The abstract self is like an intuitive source of conceptual knowledge. You don't need to be taught love or hate or good or evil. You understand these things in a deep, intuitive way. Whereas the abstract self kind of exists without the lived experience, you imagine the practical self as something that is carved out through lived experience, like wood from a block. This is actually a very Jungian view of the self, or as he'd say, the psyche. The collective or shared unconscious, as Jung described it, is a bank of conceptual and abstract concepts, while this ego and superego is something very much rooted in the sense-based experience. These two mental factions work together almost combatively to create you as you are, distinctly. Another really, really great short story that talks about the self and identity in a similar way to this is Borges and I by Luis Borges. The short story is a comparison of these two identities from the perspective of the abstract self. And in the piece, Borges discusses the shared traits between the two selves, but the different motivations behind them. Here's one of my favorite quotes from the short story. I like hourglasses, maps, 18th century typography, the taste of coffee, and the prose of Stevenson. He shares these preferences, but in a vain way that turns them into the attributes of an actor. The abstract self enjoys all the same things the practical self, but from a point of view that's selfless, while the practical self takes these things and finds enjoyment in them based on the perceptions of others, what he can get from it, and a lot of these other sense-based conclusions. The two selves are very similar and yet different in how they interact and view the world. The abstract self acts intuitively, while the practical self acts according to its environment and at times acts out of vanity. To summarize Coelho's argument, the identity is broken up into two selves, the abstract and the practical, and where you lean towards has an effect on your life's journey. If you focus only on the sense-based experience, you begin searching for fulfillment in what you've accumulated, what people think of you and the perceptions of you, and in general you find fulfillment in the sense-based experience. And if you focus too much on the abstract, you may find internal fulfillment, or the total opposite, but your family will starve, practically speaking. Really, all Coelho is trying to say with this is that for the vast majority of people, acknowledging both sides of the self is a really healthy way of going about your life. Having sources of internal fulfillment as we navigate this sense-based experience is helpful in terms of keeping us grounded and staying focused on what really matters. All in all, the text is about so much more than just identity. However, I felt that this could be a fairly easy topic to start my channel with. However, it hasn't been. To those who watched to the end, very, very grateful. If you have any advice, please give it. I would be very appreciative. Thank you. My name is Stephen Baum. Thanks for coming to my book club. I hope I see you next time. Have a good one.